I'm Elizabeth at A Literary Princess. If you are new here, welcome. I have a PhD in English literature with a focus on Victorian women novelists, and as you might expect, I love to read. Today I have another installment in my Elizabeth Gaskell project for you. We will be looking at My Lady Ludlow from 1858. In the Elizabeth Gaskell project, I am reading Gaskell's long fiction works in publication order. And My Lady Ludlow is one that I had not read before, so this was a brand new read to me. So how does this work? I will begin with a brief history and summary of the novel before moving into the major themes that I noticed and ending on my thoughts on this as a book. Please do be aware there will be spoilers, so if you don't want to know what happens in My Lady Ludlow, you should not watch this video. Let's jump in. So we left off with Gaskell with the 1855 publication of North and South. Now, 1855, My Lady Ludlow is published in 1858. What on earth is she doing in all of that time? Well, in March of 1855, Charlotte Bronte, who was a very famous novelist and also a good friend of Gaskell's, passed away. In June, her father, Patrick Bronte, approached Gaskell asking her to write a biography of Charlotte. So, in this time, she was doing all the work involved in creating this biography, interviewing people, corresponding with them. She went and visited Haworth, where Charlotte Bronte lived, and doing everything involved in creating this biography. However, she was still, in the meantime, writing short fiction, publishing most of it in Household Words, run by Dickens, despite the fact that her and Dickens had really big differences of opinion while she was serializing North and South with him. In 1857, The Life of Charlotte Bronte was published. The second and third editions followed within 5 months because the book kept needing to be revised because people were complaining about slander. Just a few of the people who were not happy. Patrick Bronte himself was not happy with his portrayal in the book. Charlotte Bronte's husband, Arthur Bell Nichols, wasn't happy with his portrayal. The headmaster and some of the teachers from Cowan Bridge School, where Charlotte Bronte went, and based Lowood School off of. So if you've read Jane Eyre, you know that's not a very flattering portrait. And then also Mrs. Robinson, who was the employer of both Anne Bronte and Branwell Bronte, and who allegedly had an affair with Branwell. So things had to be redacted. There was stuff about this in the press, scandal, publisher getting complaints. Like it was crazy. So yeah, 3 editions in 5 months. Then, a year later, in 1858, we get to My Lady Ludlow. This was published in volume 18 of Household Words, so it was not serialized, it was published all at once. It would later be republished in 1859 in the 2-volume collection Round the Sofa, which contained My Lady Ludlow in the first volume, and then I think 5 other short stories in the second volume. And Gaskell added some framing devices to have this being just people telling these stories, like Round the Sofa, as the title suggests. This was published by Sampson Low, Son and Company, who is not who had published Gaskell's other books until this point. So I don't know what happened there, why she went to this publisher. I could not find any information about that, but I'm definitely curious. I'm hoping that the biography I read of her in November will have some explanation for that. So, what is this about? This takes place in the early 19th century, and it is narrated by Margaret Dawson. She is a young woman whose family has fallen on hard times. So her mother writes to their very, very distant cousin, Lady Ludlow, requesting help, which Margaret's kind of like, that's a little awkward, because again, very distant. However, Lady Ludlow loves helping people. In fact, she has a number of young women who are distant relatives who were in need and who now live at her house and who she provides for. So Margaret goes to live with Lady Ludlow at Hanbury Court. During the course of this book, Margaret becomes disabled. I'm not entirely clear on what happens. It happens while she is walking somewhere. But the result is that she is very often just lying on the sofa in one of Lady Ludlow's rooms, and she becomes a very keen observer of everything going on around her. So we are seeing Lady Ludlow's reaction as society begins to change around her. She is very entrenched in the older ways. She is aristocratic, high class. She thinks that she has the kind of, that she and the other people of the upper classes have kind of like the God-given right to power over the lower classes, and that the lower classes should just fall in line. However, at the beginning of the 19th century, things really begin to shift socially. Education, there's a huge push for it, teaching the lower classes to read. There becomes more class fluidity with people who were maybe shop owners or business people able to make a lot of money and move into the upper classes. And Lady Ludlow, again, very firmly entrenched in the old ways, doesn't like this progress. But she has people around her who are really advocating for it. We have Mr. Gray, who is the new pastor. He is very big on educating the lower classes, especially the children. We have Mr. Horner, who conducts Lady Ludlow's business for her, and he begins educating a young lower class boy, Harry Gregson, who is the son of a poacher. We have Miss Galindo, who is the impoverished elderly daughter of a baronet and a friend of Lady Ludlow's, and she, like Lady Ludlow, is kind of firmly entrenched in the old ways at first, but she begins to shift, especially considering a family member of hers that is unknown until partway through the book. So we are seeing all these things change, seeing Lady Ludlow's reaction, and hearing about why she feels the way she does, which is largely connected to the French Revolution. In the middle of this book, we get a pretty long interlude of her telling Margaret a story of Clement, who was a childhood friend of her son's, a French aristocrat, and who managed to make it out of France, but then ended up going back into revolutionary France to try to rescue his cousin. And it's a very sad story. And so this story really shows why Lady Ludlow feels the way she does, because Clement and his cousin are caught due to a young lower class boy being able to read and reading the secret communications between them. So we have all this going on as things just slowly shift, but you know what? Lady Ludlow eventually is coming around at the end. It is very much just like kind of daily life. More, like, not quite as episodic as Cranford, but definitely on the more episodic side than something like North and South or Mary Barton. There was really not a huge amount of through plot here. So that's kind of basically what it's about. There's so much stuff that, like, just little things that go on. I'd be here all day if I tried to tell you about. So what were the major themes that I noticed? So the three themes that I want to talk about are all intertwined, and they are class, education, and changing times. So, as I said, Lady Ludlow very firmly in the old class structure. At one point, Harry Gregson's father has been falsely accused of something, and there is evidence that he didn't do it, like just flat out evidence, but the justices, who are all men of the upper class, have still found him guilty. Mr. Grey is trying to convince her to go to them and talk to them about letting him go. And she says, I suppose this additional evidence is before the justices, men of good family and of honor and credit, well known in the county. They naturally feel that the opinion of one of themselves must have more weight than the words of a man like Job Gregson, who bears a very indifferent character, has been strongly suspected of poaching, coming from no one knows where, squatting at Hareman's Common. So she's inclined to go with what she thinks is the more credible opinion of the upper class. Although she does, in the end, stand up to the justices for Job Gregson, which is very interesting. But she does that through like appealing to the way that, like, the power that the upper classes have, because she says, well, I'm bailing him out. And they're like, well, you can't do that. It's against the law. Bah, bah, bah. Who makes laws? Such as I in the House of Lords, such as you in the House of Commons. We, who make the laws in St. Stephen's, may break the mere forms of them when we have right on our sides, on our own land and amongst our own people. So it's very interesting she uses this old way to overthrow something else of the old way. That's a really interesting episode that happens very early on in the book. We are always being reminded by Margaret that Lady Ludlow is of rank. She says, my lady rarely spoke out her feelings, for, to begin with, she was of rank, and I have heard her say that people of rank do not talk about their feelings except to their equals, and even to them they conceal them, except upon rare occasions. And of course, everyone surrounding Lady Ludlow is not quite her equal. She is really the only one who is aristocratic there. Miss Galindo is the closest to her in rank, but even that is nowhere close. There's this very interesting passage about these dogs who are guarding the house and how they are pretty much vicious to everybody except Lady Ludlow. She had no fear of them, but she was a Hanbury born, and the tale went that they and their kind knew all Hanburys instantly and acknowledged their supremacy. So, like, this very much this idea of, like, the upper classes having this, some kind of God-given, like, specialness about them. Hi, Pippin. When she finds out that Mr. Horner is educating Harry Gregson and is actually involving him in the business surrounding Hanbury Court, she says, Mr. Horner, the son of a poacher and a vagabond, ought never to have been able to copy letters relating to the Hanbury estates. And at any rate, he shall not. He tries to say, well, I'm going to train him to not misuse this education. Train a barn door fowl to be a pheasant, Mr. Horner. That would be the easier task. So, yeah, her opinion's not great. And they are combated by people like Mr. Horner and Mr. Grey, who at one point says, if I, madam, as the clergyman of this parish, am not to shrink from telling what I believe to be the truth to the poor and lowly, no more am I to hold my peace in the presence of the rich and titled. So they are in conflict constantly. And the biggest conflict is that of education. Margaret says, most of her opinions, when I knew her in later life, were singular enough that then, but had been universally prevalent 50 years before, For instance, when I lived at Hanbury Court, the cry for education was beginning to come up. Mr. Raikes had set up his Sunday schools, and some clergymen were all for teaching writing and arithmetic, as well as reading. My lady would have none of this. It was leveling and revolutionary, she said. So, of course, Mr. Gray is one of those clergymen. At one point, she says, "It was a right word that I used when I called reading and writing edge tools. If our lower orders have these edge tools given to them, we shall have the terrible scenes of the French Revolution acted over again in England. When I was a girl, one never heard of the rights of men. One only heard of the duties. Now, here was Mr. Gray, only last night, talking of the right every child had to instruction. I could hardly keep my patience with him, and at length we fairly came to words. I told him I would have no such thing as a Sunday school, or a Sabbath school, as he calls it, just like a Jew, in my village." There's a lot going on there. So, yeah, she thinks that the educating the lower classes will lead to revolution. And that is because of what she has seen with the story of Clement and so many others in the French Revolution who fled to England. Speaking of Harry Gregson, she says, "If a lad is taught to read and write, as that unfortunate boy has been who was here this morning, his duties become complicated and his temptations much greater, while at the same time he has no hereditary principles and honorable training to serve as safeguards." So again, things like honor being something as innate and hereditary rather than as something somebody can learn. And so during the course of her story about Clement, she says, "And now you will learn the bad consequences of teaching the lower orders anything beyond what is immediately necessary to enable them to earn their daily bread." There is a boy named Pierre, who this Count de Crequi? I'll put the pronunciation here, or the spelling here, because I don't know how to pronounce this. This Count has begun educating him. The Count took a kind interest in his former pupil and made some sort of arrangement by which Pierre was to be taught reading and writing and accounts, and heaven knows what besides, Latin, I dare say. So Pierre, instead of being an innocent messenger, as he ought to have been, as Mr. Horner's little lad Gregson ought to have been this morning, could read writing as well as either you or I. Which then leads to him learning about the rendezvous between Clement and his cousin to escape. He tells the Count, who is jealous of Clement, because he wants to marry the cousin. And he, in turn, tells the authorities that there is a French aristocrat, that there is an aristocrat who's going to be here at this time. And thus, they are both executed. At the end of this, there is a very interesting and long passage that Lady Ludlow says, "But young people should remember that we have had this solemn experience of life on which to base our opinions and form our judgments, so that they are not mere untried theories. I am not alluding to Mr. Horner just now, for he is nearly as old as I am, within 10 years, I dare say. But I am thinking of Mr. Gray, with his endless plans for some new thing, schools, education, Sabbaths, and whatnot. Now, he has not seen what all this leads to. A young man like him, who both by position and age must have had his experience confined to a very narrow circle, ought not to set up his opinion against mine. He ought not to require reasons from me, nor to need such explanation of my arguments, if I condescend to argue, as going into relation of the circumstances on which my arguments are based in my own mind would be." And Margaret says, "Well, but it might convince him. And why should he be convinced? He has only to acquiesce. Though he is appointed by Mr. Croxton, I am the lady of the manor, as he must know." So she has had this experience that shows her that educating the lower classes is dangerous. But she's not sharing that experience because she feels that by virtue of her being the lady of the manor And older and more experienced, Mr. Grey should just immediately do what she says. But of course, though Gaskell has this character voicing these opinions, they are shown to not be correct. It is ultimately shown that these changes in society and progress moving forward are good things. That comes to the final theme that I wanted to mention, the changing times. As I've said repeatedly, Lady Ludlow is shown to be entrenched in the old ways. Margaret says, but newness was a quality Lady Ludlow especially disliked. Even in the fashions of dress and furniture, she clung to the old, to the modes which had prevailed when she was young. At one point, when speaking about a marriage that's going to happen between a higher class man, Captain James, and then this woman who is the daughter of a wealthy dissenter, she says, he must be aware she is a schismatic, a baker's daughter, and he is a gentleman by virtue and feeling, as well as by his profession, though his manners may be at times a little rough. My dear Miss Galindo, what will this world come to? But then Margaret says, Miss Galindo might possibly be aware of her own share in bringing the world to the pass which now dismayed my lady. For of course, though all was now over and forgiven, yet Miss Betsy's being received into a respectable maiden lady's house was one of the portents as to the world's future which alarmed her ladyship. So, this girl who comes to live with Miss Galindo is an illegitimate child. And at first, this completely breaks the relationship between Lady Ludlow and Miss Galindo. They don't see each other for ages. But then eventually, she's invited to come back. And to the point where the girl ends up being invited to Hanbury Court. So even though Lady Ludlow is resistant to the changes, she does eventually start going with them. Margaret ends up leaving Hanbury Court to live with her brother, and as she is musing on the town, as she's preparing to leave, she says, the village too had a different look about it. I'm sure I could not tell you what caused the change, but there were no more lounging young men to form a group at the crossroad at a time of day when young men ought to be at work. I don't say this was all Mr. Grey's doing, for there really was so much to do in the fields that there was but little time for lounging nowadays. And the children were hushed up in school and better behaved out of it, too. So it has shown things are better. The men aren't just lounging about not working, they're being productive. The children are not running amok through the town, they are in school learning. And in the end, we are told that Harry Gregson, through money left to him by Mr. Horner, well, money that is left to Lady Ludlow by Mr. Horner when he dies, that Lady Ludlow then gives to Harry Gregson because he was the intended recipient until some stuff happens financially for Lady Ludlow. He is able to go to school, get an education, become an excellent student, and in the end, we are told the Reverend Harry Gregson is now Vicar of Hanbury, and his wife is the daughter of Mr. Grey and Miss Bessy. Miss Bessy being that illegitimate child who marries the vicar, and now her daughter marries another vicar who has been raised up. So, overall, very positive about these changing times. Yes, change is scary, it's hard, but look at all these good things that come of it. So, those are the major themes I wanted to talk about. What did I think of this as a book? I really enjoyed it. It's an odd one, to be honest. In a lot of ways, it reminded me of Cranford. It's very similar in the respects that it's kind of just looking at the daily lives of the people in this small area. And a lot of the issues of class are also ones that come up in Cranford. It is not quite as episodic, I think I said that earlier, but there isn't really like a complete plot I suppose, aside from just this idea of bringing education to Hanbury, really is just more of these little pieces of day-to-day life. It's also very similar to Cranford in that we have this narrator who is kind of like on the outside, and this is because she is unable to go out, and she can only just watch and repeat what people tell her and observe the little things. So I think if you liked Cranford, you will probably like this. It is more melancholy than Cranford. Cranford is very funny and kind of joyful. This is a lot more subdued. Like the humor really isn't there. There are some really quite sad things that happen here. I mean, the major thing is that interlude about the French Revolution. But that is obviously like pretty sad. But we have a lot of character deaths. We have 2 characters who become disabled, actually. Another one in addition to Margaret. So it is not as happy and joyful and kind of upbeat as Cranford is. But it's a very similar look at kind of the daily life and small changes in a town like that, like a small village. Lady Ludlow is a great character. Obviously, some of her opinions are just completely, outdated, and that's the point. But even though she is so resistant to change, she does get there. When she thinks something is right, she goes with it. So I really did quite like her. This is not my favorite Elizabeth Gaskell book by far. I really do prefer her ones that have more plot going on in them. But it's really beautifully written and deals with some very fascinating themes. I actually think my favorite part was that interlude in the French Revolution. At first I was like, why are we having such a long part about this? I was like, it'll take up maybe 2 chapters. No, it is a huge part, but I got so invested in it. It was very interesting. And especially considering, the other Victorian depiction of the French Revolution that I have read is A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. So it was interesting to see Gaskell's depiction of it. So I gave this 4 stars, and I would recommend it. Again, it's not my favorite Gaskell, but it is very good, and I think if you like Cranford for the more daily life aspects of it, you will probably enjoy My Lady Ludlow. So that is My Lady Ludlow. For July, I will be looking at Sylvia's Lovers, and I should probably start that soon so that I can get that video out by the end of the month, which is what I would like to do, but we'll see what happens. Let me know down in the comments, have you read My Lady Ludlow? What did you think of it? What themes did you notice? Do you agree with me? Disagree with me? If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to see more of my bookish content. It has been great chatting with you. I will see you soon. Bye.